It's trying to find ways to get things to your portfolio that take as little time and produce as high yield as possible, because your time is limited.
Hello, welcome to the Coffee on Call Medicine podcast, a podcast series to help ease your transition from medical school to foundation. So sit back, put away the textbooks, and grab a coffee. Enjoy. So, welcome back to Coffee on Call, the Foundation Medicine podcast. I'm Richard, and I'm here with Imi.
Hiya.
And Rachel.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk about professional development and like developing a portfolio as a junior doctor. What does that kind of look like for you guys? Do you know what that means when we say professional portfolio? Is that the sort of words that fill you with the sense of impending, I want to go to sleep and it's really boring? Or?
Yeah, it kind of makes me think, oh God, paperwork. I don't know about you.
Yes, it's more documentation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you do have some allocated time to do portfolio. So I'm an F2, and I know for F1s and F2s, you have a portfolio that's set out for you that's called Horus. And it kind of, you're told by the foundation school everything that you have to do to pass your foundation year. And
so wait, can you fail foundation year then?
So theoretically you can, but it would be, as long as you keep up with your portfolio and you kind of do everything that's asked of you, so reflections, case-based discussions that you've documented, that kind of thing, it's very easy to pass it. You've just got to stay on top of it.
So there's kind of two main areas of portfolio, isn't there? There's the kind of bare minimum foundation year Horus portfolio stuff that you have to do. There's no options around this. Everyone's got to do basically the same. And then separately to that is the more sort of like broader professional portfolio, which is what people talk about when they're thinking about like job applications. So let's say you're coming to the end of foundation and you're looking to apply for internal medicine training or core surgical training or radiology or whatever you want to go and do, and you need to sort of build up your evidence for that application. So we'll try and talk about both. So in the foundation portfolio, which you've said is called Horus, the way that works essentially is in each of your placements, you have a foundation, 3 placements per foundation year. You'll be allocated a supervisor per placement, which is called your clinical supervisor. And then you'll have an educational supervisor who you have for the whole year. And they're kind of in charge of keeping you to task and making sure that each of these requirements for the year get done. And there's different things that you've got to do. So should we talk about a few of those, Imi? So how do you find reflections?
So I'm in the camp that like reflections. I think some people don't really know what to write, or they feel a bit uncomfortable. But I mean, there is some guidance on the HEE, the Health Education England website, that sort of prescribe what you can write. But essentially, you need to think about, you've gone home from work and something stood out in your mind. It might be something that went really well. It might be something that you learned. It might be actually had a bit of a difficult experience, like a death or an arrest, and you sort of need to process it personally and professionally. And when you write a reflection, it essentially asks you to give some detail about what happened, what was the setting, and what was kind of your takeaway points, or what you're going to go on and do to sort of further your learning. Mm-hmm. And that can be private or shared with your supervisor. So I know some colleagues of mine have, perhaps had quite a difficult day at work and they've written a private reflection. So only they can see it, but it means that maybe later on down the year, they can look back on that experience and think, oh, do you know, actually that was helpful because of X, Y, Z, or, I've come so far from that, that first thing that I found really difficult. So yeah, I quite like a reflection.
Yeah, and there's a minimum number, I think, isn't there, over the year? I can't actually remember. I think you're supposed to do about 5 as a minimum per rotation. So that'd be 15 in a foundation year 1, and that sort of, I think that's how it works. I may have got that wrong, but I think that's about right.
Each foundation school, when you start, I mean, you'll be inundated with emails as a new F1, but certainly in the first month, they send you an email that gives you your foundation school requirements to what we call pass ARCP. So ARCP is your annual review of competence progression, which basically means, did you do enough to move on to the next year? And they'll prescribe, you need X number of reflections, Y number of CBDs, and you have to, that's sort of the minimum. Yeah. Ideally, you'd have more than that.
Yeah. So there's the reflection side of things, which are obviously they're kind of mandatory, but as you say, really valuable. And then there's the aspect that they call workplace-based assessments. So that's things like DOPS. So that's a direct observed procedural skill, I think.
Yeah.
Mini KEX, so a mini clinical evaluation exercise, I think is what that stands for. And then case-based discussions. So do you want to talk about like what each of those are?
Yeah,
Rachel?
yeah. So I remember when I first started, I was baffled by all of these because there's so many abbreviations, and you get emails, like you said, from your foundation school saying you need X many of this and that. And I didn't really know how to approach it initially. So just to break it down, so case-based discussions can be, you know, if you've seen a patient that's been particularly difficult, maybe if you've had to discuss it with a senior, you can then ask for to get it evidenced on your portfolio. And you can either do it kind of prospectively or retrospectively. So maybe you've had an interesting discussion and then you ask, can I get this signed off? Or you go to a senior specifically with the aim of, can I have this discussion with you for my portfolio? And then there's the mini KEXs. So they are some med students I know have KEXs as well that they have to do to get signed off. So it'll be very similar to those. So it's kind of someone watching you doing something clinical. So, leading a consultation, having a difficult discussion with a family member or with a patient. So it's there's no prescribed things of what you have to do those on. It's about finding opportunities. And then the DOPS, so direct observation of procedural skills. Again, there's nothing prescribed of what you have to get signed off, but it can be things like bloods, cannulas, NG tubes, catheters, that kind of thing. Yeah. And you just have to have someone have watched you do it and then sign you off for it.
So I think the main difference is things like, so like a DOP, for example, you might get just physically inserting the catheter, someone watches you do it, that would be a DOP. Whereas the overall management of a patient with urinary retention, you could do as a mini KEX, because you could be seen taking the history, performing an examination, coming up with a plan, explaining it, and then catheterizing them. And that would be like a kind of a bigger episode of care that you get assessed on, as opposed to just physically, can you put this tube in this hole?
You can also get more specialty specific DOPs as well. Yeah. So I did a gastro job and I got signed off on acidic drains and taps, which I found really useful. And then it's quite nice to have that evidence. So now that I've changed trust, I can say, hey, I'm proficient in this skill and here's my evidence.
Yeah. So moving on from the sort of core, bare minimum stuff that you have to do for foundation and the Horus portfolio, in terms of building a sort of broader portfolio of evidence when you're looking at moving on from foundation and applying to other jobs. So the professional portfolios, I think my advice for that would be to look at the all of these jobs have a person specification. So if you look at the person specification for, let's say, radiology, if you Google that, you'll find out what the essential criteria are to be appointed as a radiology trainee and what the desirable criteria are. And the same is true of internal medicine, surgery, etc. And then you can see kind of what you need to be aiming to try and tick off. And lots of these things are quite predictable and quite common to different specialties. So things like leadership skills, so how you're going to evidence that leadership. So that might be involvement in local committees, getting involved in the Junior Doctor Forum, that sort of thing. Things like audit or quality improvement, which we'll come back to. And then other things like, so for example, giving presentations at conferences or publications and things like that. So how have you guys found kind of organising and bringing together these things? I don't know, have you applied for anything this year? Or?
So it can be a little tricky to manage your time, I think, in F1, F2, because suddenly your time is quite prescribed by someone else. It's up to your rota, and that's going to be a mixture of hours, weekends, nights, etc. So you're also going to be quite tired from work. So it's trying to find ways to get things to your portfolio that take as little time and produce as high yield as possible, because your time is limited. So for example, I'm quite keen on teaching and medical education. So I often do like ad hoc bedside teaching on the wards. So sometimes, you'll be a student, you'll come along, you say, can you teach me? Can I shadow you? And I'll do things like case-based discussions with them, or I'll supervise you with this catheter and sign you off. And I devised a Google form that just essentially says sort of, it's all anonymous. What year are you? What did we do? What did you find useful? What can I improve on? How confident do you feel now that we've had this session? And I just kindly ask the students, would you mind filling one out after we've done our teaching? And that way it's part of my working day. And then I have some evidence that I can show, day to day I'm teaching students and this is what they've said and these are the actions I've taken to try and improve.
Yeah, I do the same. I have a little QR code on my phone and they can scan that
Yeah.
and then takes them to exactly the same feedback form, which basically says, did you enjoy that? Did you find it useful? Have you done that sort of thing?
Yeah, I've also got a similar kind of survey that I ask people to fill out, although I don't always remember.
Yeah.
I think some of the other requirements are a little bit harder. So you can't just do research or a quality improvement project just during your working day necessarily. But like I said earlier, you do have set time, self-development time, that you should get the equivalent of 2 hours per working week to do things for your portfolio, your Horus portfolio, but also your professional development portfolio. And I think often finding those opportunities for research, quips, etc., is by speaking to seniors. So I've had quite a positive experience where if I've expressed interest to a consultant in something that I want to maybe get a quip out of, they are often really happy to have people on board who are excited about that or keen to get involved. And, often they have things already that they can get you involved in.
So I think one of the big ones there is that, the phrase like bring solutions, not problems. So if you go to a consultant and you say, hey, I've got this idea. Have you noticed how it's really annoying when X, Y, and Z happen on the ward? And wouldn't it be better if we did this instead? Then that is a real option for them to say like, oh, actually, I really like that idea. How could we do that? And if you already in mind are like, well, I was thinking we could do a quick audit where we look through notes and check this, that, and the other, whatever. And then I'll implement this change, which I think we should do this. And then we can remeasure it and see if it's helped. Then you've kind of like come along with basically all of the answers and the consultant just has to go like, actually, I really like that idea, get on with it. As opposed to if you go to the consultant kind of cup in hand and go, I want a project, then your chances of success, I would say, are diminished because they then have to invest all of the effort in thinking up what to change. And if they already have the idea to change it, chances are they might have changed it already. So those are much less fruitful conversations, I think, usually. If you have an idea, share it.
I think it's also worth mentioning for your more broader sort of career portfolio, depending what you're applying to, there's sort of a point system. It's worth much more and it's much more impressive to an employer if you've had the idea, you've taken ownership and then collected the data.
Yeah.
And if you want advice on how to go about doing this, then absolutely you can go to your supervisor and say, I'd like to do a quip in this subject. This is my idea. Do you think that's feasible? Can you tell me about like the policies? Do I need to get it approved by the department lead? Is there an audit team I need to speak to sort of get it officially registered? How can I go about doing this? And they can support you with that.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. I think it's worth looking at what you're going to get the points for and trying to work kind of smart rather than hard. So a simple project done to completion is way better than being involved in a really complicated thing that never got anywhere. So kind of like learning to say no and learning to focus on, if you've got your audit, let's say it is, and you've got it, there's no point starting it, half doing it, getting distracted and trying to get on another project and another project and another project and then getting none of them done. Because involvement in 8 things is worth 0 points on an application. Completing one simple thing well is worth lots of points. So get something done and get it to completion and don't buy off more than you can chew.
I think it's worth mentioning time frame as well. So for the audits and projects we're talking about, if okay, I'm in this specialty for 4 months, don't start the project when you've got 2 weeks left. You're not going to complete it.
Yeah, a lot of these things take a lot longer than you think, especially if you've got to register audits, maybe get ethical approval for them, depending on what they are, you seek permission, etc. Those things can take a long time. So you need to be mindful of that.
So it's probably not a bad time to start thinking about like top tips in terms of if you're either a final year student coming into foundation or you are a foundation doctor, like your top tips for getting these things together. So if you had a tip to give someone to sort of help flesh out the portfolio, what would it be?
I would say treat everything as a potential option for putting on your Horus portfolio. So you don't have to always go to someone and say, can I do a case-based discussion with you, which can seem quite daunting. You can do it as, I've had this really interesting discussion, now can I evidence that?
Yeah. And you and me?
Yeah, I think don't be afraid of the portfolio. I think I was almost embarrassed when I started that I didn't really know what Horus was and everyone's talking about it. You're all in the same boat. Ask your supervisor. They've often had trainees before, they can tell you. You can ask your TPD, so your program director for the deanery, and say, could you give me some guidance, and start early. So ARCP, which we mentioned earlier, is sort of your final meeting where they say, did you pass F1 to go on to F2? And that falls midway or sort of just the first third into your last rotation. So you basically need to have your Horus portfolio ready come sort of April, May time rather than August, which I think a lot of people don't realise. So stack your portfolio early, get more than you need, and then you won't have any worries.
Yeah, actually, that's very true. So the applications for things like core surgical training, the application deadline is November of your F2 year. So if you've gone through all of F1 and get to the start of F2 in August with nothing done, then you have got quite a short period of time to get everything ready to apply. So yeah, starting early is good. I think mine would probably be start with the end in mind. So have a look at the person spec for the careers you're interested in. There's loads of overlap with the requirements. So for example, there'll be loads of stuff that you could do that would tick off boxes on a radiology application, that would still tick off boxes on surgery. So don't worry that you're going to pigeonhole yourself, because loads of the stuff, projects you can do, etc., you can use on any application. So start with a goal in mind for what you need. So whether that's you need to get a publication, if that's your goal, make that clear to your supervisor. So what I need to get out of this placement is I'm looking to get something published. The idea of what I'd like to do is X, and then you've got something to work towards. I think if you kind of leave it last minute, you've got no hope. And if you go just sort of begging for projects with no real destination in mind, generally don't do very well doing that. Cool. Right, I think we'll wrap that up. That's enough chat about portfolios and Horus.
Yeah.
So
I'm ready for bed. Don't know about you.
yeah. Right, so thanks very much, guys, and tune in next time.
Cheers.